Welcome all in, everybody, for a Saturday edition of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. A huge one today, as it is Gonzaga Saint Mary's tonight at 8 on ESPN, the game of the year in the WCC. And it takes on a much different, definitely a bit of a different look and feel, as it's the Zags looking up at St. Mary's in the standings. We'll get into all of that. Andy Patton from Locked On Zags and Locked On College Basketball podcasts will be on the join later. And of course, if you did not see some of the teases, we will also be having St. Mary's Hall of Famer and Gonzaga enemy Omar Samhan will be joining a little bit later to talk about what we're going to see in this rivalry, just his experiences through it, and what all of that entails. Also, we'll go over Washington State and USF looking to bounce back after their loss to Pacific. LMU goes for 5 straight wins, so kind of keep an eye out for the Lions. And Pepperdine also starting to make a bit of moves here as well, as they picked up a win, and their schedule does start to look a little more favorable for them. But we're going to start with a quick recap of what we got to see over the course of the early part of the week, especially when it comes to St. Mary's, Santa Clara, and then also Gonzaga, Oregon State. And I'll start with St. Mary's and Santa Clara. St. Mary's had won their first two of this 8-game gauntlet. Going into that one, had come off a win at Washington State, winning to Santa Clara against a team that was looking to bounce back and have a good performance. Uh, Santa Clara had just come off that big loss at Oregon State, which to an extent is like there were a lot of things were not going their way. They were banged up. Oregon State's hard to play in their own building. So there was a lot going against Santa Clara in that one, and returning home against obviously a very good St. Mary's team was going to be a challenge for them. But this is a team that had beaten Gonzaga just a couple weeks ago up in Spokane. So there was at least some optimism going into it. But after a tight first half where it was a 2-point game at the break, St. Mary's turned on the Jets and went on a 30-0 run and then won this game 67-54. They did not allow Santa Clara to score for 12 minutes and 47 seconds of game time, which gave them a 52-26 lead at that point. Mitchell Saxon was in foul trouble early in this game, which is what Santa Clara was able to take advantage of. But in the second half, Saxon had another great defensive performance. He did throw in 12 points. To me, it's becoming very clear that this guy is the clear favorite for WCC Defensive Player of the Year again. And just the way the St. Mary's team it was so clinical against Santa Clara. Once they hit the break, once they got into a rhythm there, and it was a defensive rhythm, they were just suffocating Santa Clara. Santa Clara could not get a good, easy look. They were forced into a lot of bad shots, and it just started to snowball on them in that second half. And St. Mary's looked incredibly comfortable in that environment on the road. Their 15th straight road win, which is the best in all of college basketball. So, just a crazy outing for St. Mary's in that one. And that takes them to 9-0 going into this game against Gonzaga. That takes them to a spot where they have a 2-game lead on Gonzaga going into this one. And it also puts St. Mary's in a position where now the win against Gonzaga can mean that much more. They're 3-0 in this tough stretch again. We kind of gone over and over again about this 8-game stretch for St. Mary's, where it was going to be Washington State twice, USF twice, Santa Clara twice, Gonzaga, Oregon State, all within these 8 games. And they are 3-0 in the first few tests. They have picked up 2 road wins in the process. 2 of those wins have been by double digits. They are still cruising along and have continued to play as good a defense as we saw against some of the lower teams in the league earlier on in conference play. They only let USF score 51 points. They only let Santa Clara score 54 points. Washington State is the one outlier that scored 75. But that's also a tough road game to go up there and play against a team that does still score this ball very efficiently in the Cougars. But the St. Mary squad is rolling, and they're also going to, and they're taking on a Gonzaga team. While they did hit a little bit of a road bump a couple weeks ago, they look like they may have figured something out. Against Oregon State on Tuesday night, Gonzaga won 98-60. They just really jumped on the Beavers from the get-go. They held Oregon State to 38% from the field. They were 23-4 in points off turnovers in that game, 48-15 in bench points. Caleb Battle, who has now been coming off the bench the last couple of nights, he had 23 points, much more what we thought we would see from Caleb Battle early on in the season. 12-13 from the free throw line. Graham Ike had 22. Defensively, this team is starting to look more capable. They're starting to look more of what we kind of saw early on in the season, and it did seem like that they got away from that quite a bit in that matchup. So again, like you kind of read this a little bit. Don't want to read too much into what we saw from Gonzaga in that 1 week, 2 week stretch where they were just awful defensively. They've made some changes. Emmanuel Innocente is now in the starting lineup. And that has made quite a bit of difference in what we have seen from this team. He is a defensive first guy, and sometimes it's a little bit tough to play with a couple of maybe guys who are not quote unquote scorers and Innocente and say Ben Gregg. But this is a team that needed a little bit more balance. They needed something different. They needed to shake it up, and they clearly did. And it has worked these first 2 games since the switch up against Portland, against Oregon State, albeit Portland, you kind of take that with a grain of salt. But now the test with St. Mary's. This is for both of these teams. Right now, they are both positioned to be in the NCAA tournament, albeit like both of these teams probably do need still a little bit more, I guess it's like oomph to the resume to really solidify before we get to the end of the season. But these two teams just know each other so well. They have split the last 8 matchups against each other. Last year, each of them won on each other's home floor. We know the story about the styles of play in this game. Gonzaga is 5th in adjusted offense in the country. St. Mary's is 25th in adjusted defense. Gonzaga Gonzaga scores 89 points a game. That's second in all of college basketball. St. Mary's allows 61 points a game, which is 7th in all of college basketball. St. Mary's is second in rebounding margin, 7th in offensive rebounds. Gonzaga is 22nd in rebounding margin. Gonzaga is first in assist to turnover ratio. St. Mary's is 9th in assist to turnover ratio. Gonzaga is 10 in the net. St. Mary's is 22 in the net going into today. Both are coming off big wins. And this St. Mary's squad, this Gonzaga team, they know each other in and out. There's no secrets about what these two teams are. There's no secrets between these two. They have played each other more than anyone in all of college basketball over the last decade. I mean, these are two teams that annually see each other 3 times, the 2 in the regular season, and then they almost always play each other in Vegas for the WCC championship. This is going to be a fascinating matchup. One of the matchups I'm looking for, one of the matchups I'm watching is not necessarily a direct matchup, but like 2 guys who are incredibly similar in their roles of what they give their teams, and that's Ben Gregg and Luke Barrett. These 2 are the glue guys. They are the guys who really fill in a lot of the gaps that these teams need. They are the effort guys. They get the loose balls. They are going to, if you need an energy boost, they're going to be the ones that's jumping on the floor, diving for loose balls, getting key offensive rebounds. That's what these 2 are. And we have seen it time and time again when their teams have needed them, they've been able to jump in. Ben Gregg, he's been in double-digit scoring 5 of the last 6 games. He's averaging 12 points, 7 rebounds, and he's shooting 50% from 3 in WCC play. He's been playing much better as of late. And for him, it's like it has seemed like over the last couple of years, like he's the guy that when push comes to shove, they need a boost. It's Ben Gregg. And I think back to what we saw against Santa Clara a couple of weeks ago when Gonzaga got down 10 late in that game, where it looked like Santa Clara might start to just run away with that thing. It was Ben Gregg who jolted that team kind of back into action. It was Ben Gregg who got them back into playing the way we're used to seeing them play and get back into that contest. That was something that I thought was that's the sort of play that they need. That's the sort of energy that they have been missing. It seemed like they had been missing for a few weeks, maybe close to a month. But that's someone who needs a little bit of help on that front. Like he can't be the only one. So that's why like the addition of Innocenti into the starting lineup is honestly is very helpful for this Gonzaga squad, because Ben Gregg, as great as he has been, as good as he has been in WCC play and throughout the course of the season, this he needs a little bit more support on that front. Now, I will say this, like if you actually look at Gonzaga seasons over the last couple of years, it has been almost like the Ben Gregg effect to an extent. It was last year when he was inserted into the starting lineup just around the Kentucky game that Gonzaga started to take off. They looked more balanced. They looked more the team that we all thought we would have seen from the get-go. And kind of the same thing happened when Ben Gregg got back into the starting lineup in the non-conference. We saw that little burst of energy. We saw them kind of take back some of what we saw last season. And I think the bottom line for Gonzaga is like, dude, you just got to keep him in the game, because that's a clear guy that just is going to do all the little things right. And he's going to do it the way that Mark Few wants him to do it. And the same can be said on the other side for Luke Barrett. Luke Barrett is one of these guys, especially you look at what Luke Barrett was a year ago to what he is this year. He is carrying on so much more of the load. And it's kind of amazing when you think about that. A year ago, he was averaging about 11 minutes a game. He was playing behind Alex Dukas, so he wasn't getting a ton of playing time. And this year, he's one of the league leaders in minutes per game. He's it's rare to actually see him get off the floor at this point. He's averaging 10 points, 6 rebounds. He's shooting 50% in WCC play. He's also seen a jump in his contributions throughout the course of league. And another guy who, on a given night, he might be the leading scorer, but a lot of times his job is to get the loose ball, a lot of times be a primary defender, be a one-on-one defender, make life difficult. He's one of those guys who, if he's on your team, you love him. If he is not on your team, you absolutely hate this sort of guy. And every good team, every great team needs someone like that. And both of these teams, Gonzaga and St. Mary's, has one of those guys. While they're not quite the same player. They have slightly different skill sets. What they mean to their team and what they do for their squad is very, very similar. All right. As we switch on talking a little bit about Gonzaga St. Mary's, Omar Samhan is joining us on the podcast. Omar, thanks a lot for hopping on and chatting some Gonzaga St. Mary's basketball. How are you feeling about the matchup tonight? Because I know like you're going to be pumped and being in that building.
I'm pumped, and thanks for having me on. Anytime I get a chance to talk trash about the Zags, I take it. So thanks for having me, and super excited to be there tonight. And the energy, as you know, on these nights, especially the rivalry, just through the roof. So
talk about like that kind of the week leading up, or like maybe the days leading up to a Gonzaga game. When you were still on campus, still a student, what was maybe the different prep, or what was the energy like kind of knowing that was the game that was on the schedule coming up?
I mean, as a team, there's a crazy buzz and everybody's excited. But as a campus, like when you're in the CAF or walking to class, the other students are like, hey, we need this win Saturday, like we'll be there. It's not a normal game. So I think the energy is just through the roof. And, last night, if I was at St. Mary's still, I probably wouldn't have slept much. Really excited. Most of the guys, I'm sure, were ready to go last night. So it's just it's a game you highlight and circle at the beginning of the year, and unbelievable rivalry, but the excitement around it is unmatched.
You were there toward the beginning of what became the rivalry between these two teams. you were one of the guys who got 3 wins against this Gonzaga squad over the course of your years at St. Mary's. Talk me through like just like what when you got to the games and you got into these matchups. What was just like the feeling like in both of these buildings, both in Moraga and then also in Spokane, and even in Vegas, obviously getting that WCC championship there. Uh, what just like the toughness, the energy, that the also the animosity that there is between these two teams, because obviously like these are two teams that for years and years have just do not like each other.
Right. No, I mean, I think that I helped, throw gas on the fire a little. When I came in, my redshirt year was Adam Morrison's year. So they came in and just torched us, and Morrison was talking crazy to our fans. And like as a redshirt freshman, it was probably the most people I ever saw in a gym. Like it was sold out at St. Mary's. I hadn't been to Gonzaga yet. So it was a great game, but we got our butts whooped and it didn't go well. So the next year was my first year actually playing in the game, and I was a little too hyped up. Like I said, I hadn't slept the night before. I circled the game probably 6 months ahead of time. By the time we got to the game, I hated Mark Few. I hated Josh Heinfeld and all the Gonzaga players at that time. And it was on national TV, and I got some buckets early. And one thing led to another, and I'm screaming at Mark Few in a timeout, saying mean things to him. And it just kind of shotgunned the rivalry. We ended up winning that night. Diamond Simpson has like 30. I have 20. He's a sophomore. I'm a freshman. And it kind of sparked at least the hatred that they had for me, because I was screaming at their head coach on national TV, some fat freshman with his hair swinging, saying F you to their coach. Everybody's reading my lips. RB made me apologize the next day. So I think it was just a really fun start to my Gonzaga deal. And I thought like they tried to bully us back then. So I just wanted to make a stance. Like, this isn't big brother, little brother. This is two good programs fighting for the conference, crown. And I think that those years, the next year Patty comes, I think that kind of put it more as a fair deal, not just a one-sided rivalry.
Yeah, and I remember vividly because obviously we have crossover in those St. Mary's years, and I remember that game with you and Diamond going back and forth, and just it was kind of like to me it was like your coming out party. It was like the statement of like, oh, this guy is going to be really good for years to come, and just thinking about like that sort of game, that sort of energy, like when you go back to teammates and see some of them, what are some of the moments that maybe stand out in your mind when you talk with Mickey or with Patty or with Diamond or like whoever's up, like you ever meet up with? What's some of the moments that like stand out to you when you talk about Gonzaga?
I mean, it's hard with Mickey and those guys that I played with my senior year, Ben Allen and Deli. It's hard to talk about anything but that Vegas game. They had beat us twice my senior year. They beat us at home. They beat us in Spokane. And we had to win the conference tournament to get to the NCAA tournament. And we went out there, and Ben, Mickey, Deli, everybody played phenomenal. And I actually played bad, but all those guys played really well. We ended up beating them by 20. And by far is my favorite memory because RB subs us all out with like 2 minutes to go. And none of us had ever won a WCC championship. So we just got to soak it in, and all of our fans were going nuts. And for us, it had been such a long road to get that first one. Now they're like every other year they get one. But at that point, we hadn't gotten one. Our fans hadn't had one. So it was just such a great moment, like cutting the net. So by far undefeated. But my personal favorite moment was that first one, where I just felt like I punched the bully right in the face and we were rolling. And I mean, me and Few, now when I see him, it's always funny and we joke, but I had a legit hatred for the guy for 4 years.
I mean, it was tough not to really dislike some of those guys on that team at that point. And now thinking about like you talked about the teammates and what you kind of talk about with them, but the evolution of this rivalry, again, you mentioned it like at a certain point it was just getting over the hump, getting that first championship. Now this program is getting those championships almost on a regular basis. They've won the regular season each of the last couple of years. They were the tournament champion a year ago. As now you get to watch as an alum and someone who came through this program, what kind of goes through your mind as you see just where this program is today versus where it was when you walked in the door?
Yeah, I mean, proud would be, the word that comes to mind. Just we wanted that. That's what we were striving for. RB was talking about like leave a legacy, you know, stuff like that to us. And at 18, 19, 20, you're not sure what he's talking about, but you show up every day and we all worked hard and we did the right thing. And looking back, like we did, we left a legacy, and to turn on the TV and watch them win it all last year and things of that nature, just, you got to laugh. Even the year after I left, the next year, Mickey and Holt and those guys go up there and beat him at Spokane for like the first time that we won in Spokane maybe in Bennett's career. And it was just awesome to start seeing the changes as a program. And we were never in postseason. We had like one postseason right before I got there, my senior year of high school, with Kicker and EJ Rowland, who's he's back at Saint Mary, and all those guys. Paul, great team. But besides that one, we weren't a postseason. You didn't see us in the postseason. And then my first year, we missed it, and I was in RB's office, and we had a big talk, and I was like, hey, we're not missing postseason again. And he was like, well, you better get to work, you know? and I don't think they have. Between the NIT and the NCAA, I don't know if we've missed a postseason in the last 14 years or whatever it's been since 2010. So pretty cool.
Yeah. And now you mentioned EJ and some of the others. I mean, this is a program that you see former Gaels coming back all the time. Obviously, there's 4 on the coaching staff right now with EJ, Mickey, Rayhan, Dan Sheets is still on that coaching staff. What does it say, just again, like about this program, what Randy has built, and just the community that he has set up, that you guys are around all the time and want to continue to be around what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's 2 parts. It's your experience there with Randy and your brothers, but then it's Randy's phenomenal at keeping us all together and like bringing us back, help. Like, it's by design that 4 of the guys who played for him were his assistants. He could have hired other guys. There's other assistants out there. I mean, EJ doesn't have a ton of coaching experience, but he has played 15 plus years at the highest level all over the world, and he played there. So RB will work with those guys, and he just treats us all like family still. You know, he's still looking out for us. If we need anything, any of us can call him. Some of us are cops, firemen, NBA players, overseas players, whatever it may be. You can all rely on RB, and he does a great job of just staying in touch and bringing us back. So I love going to the games and seeing guys that played there, coached there. When we were players, he told us, you know, this is your guys' program too. RB was always on that. He wants it to feel like it's everybody's program, and he backs it up. He gets us involved. He helps us out. So I could not have imagined playing anywhere else. And like, now I'm an agent. I represent some guys on NIL. I try not to because NIL's crazy, but I do. And I always tell people about my experience at St. Mary's and tell them, try to find that, because I would have sacrificed that for any amount of money. And I think that that's a real tribute to what RB was able to do there and the support of the school and everything else.
What's maybe a story that just stands out to you about maybe that connection that you've had with Randy and what he's meant? Is there a moment that kind of like stands out and doesn't even need to be a basketball related item?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, it'd be hard to name one, but probably the biggest, like, doesn't need to do this, but doing it, is my second year pro. I was trying to get on with the Houston Rockets and bouncing around overseas, and I tore my ACL. And it was like a long recovery, and I was just starting to be able to play and had nowhere to play. And he was like, hey, practice with the guys. Like, what? It was like middle of season, you know? And he brings me in as like the 16th guy. He's letting me practice with like the red shirts, but I'm in practice every day. I'm in the drills, and I'm me, so I'm crazy. I'm yelling at people. I'm fouling people. You know, I played like the only way I know how to play. So it was probably disruptive to the team in the practice, but RB didn't care. He knew I needed it. So, I mean, it's a small example, but it went a long way because I wasn't his player anymore. You know, he didn't need to do that. When you're playing and I average 20 and 10, yeah, he'll do a lot for you.
Right.
But when you can't help him, he'll still help you. And I think that is this speaks deeply and says a lot.
All right. You obviously, as an agent, you have to run into a fair number of Zags. You have to run into some of those Gonzaga players, whether it be like current guys who are coming up or like guys who've been around forever. How did those conversations go? Is there any bit a little like kind of like jabbing like St. Mary's Gonzaga items? Like how does that go with those former Zags that you run into?
Yeah, I mean, I see them all, like a variety, like guys from Morrison and them that played when I was there to like I see Chet all the time, just being at a lot of NBA games. But yeah, it's always a play on something. Like last time I saw Chet, he's not playing, so he's like in the tunnel, and I'm yelling, "Beat the Zags!" He's turning around like 1-on-1. Let's play 1-on-1 when I'm healthy. You know, they'll talk trash back. All of them know who I am. I know who all that. You know, they are. Anybody who's been in the rivalry watches the rivalry. So like all the old Zag guys know our current team and who's on it and stuff like that, and vice versa. So it is a great rivalry, and it's amazing that like someone like Chet, it's been 10 years since I played more, and he knows what it is. I know, you know, there's a level of respect if you're a St. Mary's guy and a Gonzaga guy. So it is fun, and it's more fun when I see like Zachary or one of those guys that I actually played against, because we end up talking stories and, you know, sharing some funny stories.
And thinking about, again, going back to the matchup tonight, is like, you've seen the St. Mary's team play a fair number of times. You've probably watched Gonzaga and see what they've done. With you, what are you kind of maybe looking at? What are you kind of expecting out of this one? Because the St. Mary's squad is just rolling right now. It seems like, and it feels like that. And Gonzaga started to figure a couple things out going into this matchup. This is kind of like that 1-2 punch. Like, what's kind of your read as you're kind of prepping your own self for what you're going to watch later tonight?
Well, I'm a bad person to ask, because we're gonna crush the Zags. They suck. But no, I think for us, like, we're super balanced. Like, I was at the game the other night, and you just don't know who's gonna score, because we have so many talented scoring options, and we haven't always had that. So I just think with so many pieces, and we can go inside out, I think that we are in a great position to get this win tonight. And I feel like we match up better this year than even years in the past.
Yeah. All right. Got to get you out of here. I will say, like, ESPN put out the Zags are a 1.5 favorite, which I'm like, I'm not buying that one going into this one. But thanks, Omar, for hopping on. It's always great talking with you. I will definitely probably see you at one of these games later on down the road. And we'll catch up then. Thanks a lot, Omar.
Yes, sir. Thank you. God is a Gael.
God is a Gael. All right. So this St. Mary's game, the St. Mary's rivalry, is a big one. It is one of the marquee matchups in all of college basketball. This is going to be a great night. Again, I mentioned the Zags are a 1.5 favorite according to ESPN, which I was kind of thinking was going to end up being St. Mary's 2.5. This is not going to be a blowout in any respect. I think this is going to end up being a close one, as it always is. This is going to go down to the wire. And I could see it being, now, obviously with free throws, whatever else, it'll probably end up being like a 6 or 7 point game one way or the other. But there are a couple of keys I'm looking at in this matchup. I'm looking at Mitchell Saxon and foul trouble. If he can stay out of foul trouble, obviously that benefits St. Mary's a lot going into this one. He got into foul trouble against Santa Clara, and while Santa Clara obviously is another talented team, like I think the pressure to stay out of it against Gonzaga is even higher. So that is one of the keys I'm looking at. And Caleb Battle is a big X factor here. If he is able to go off like we have seen him do, like if he has a performance much like Oregon State, that is going to obviously heavily favor Gonzaga. If he is able to be held in check, maybe not quite to the level of what Santa Clara did, which when they held him scoreless, but if they can slow him down, force him left, and that is going to be a huge factor for St. Mary's. The 3-point shooting is obviously always a thing. Gonzaga is a very good 3-point shooting team. Keeping them off that line, or at least making it more difficult when they get there, is going to be a key for the Gaels. And pace of play. These two teams, it is all about pace of play. Both are incredibly good at forcing you to play the way they want to play. Gonzaga is really good at this. St. Mary's is really good at this. And both of them obviously have had their moments where they have forced the other to play that way. Watching Gonzaga try to play St. Mary's at St. Mary's' pace and score in the 60s is a very different experience for Zag fans, but it's also one they're at least familiar with watching because they've seen it happen a number of times in the course of this rivalry. And the implications of what we're going to see. If St. Mary's wins this game, they'll move to 10-0. They'll be 3 games up on the rest of the WCC with 8 games left, including Gonzaga. They're in the driver's seat for their 3rd straight WCC championship. They are likely going to end up being the top seed in the WCC tournament, and fair chance based on where St. Mary's has been in the AP poll that they could be ranked by the time Monday morning rolls around. For Gonzaga, climbing back into this race is a critical thing for them. If they hope to get a WCC championship, if they are going to get back into that, they cannot lose this game. They have to figure out a way to get a win in Moraga and inch closer to St. Mary's. It's one of the few times that we're going into this game, and this is not actually a first place game. Gonzaga wins this game, they just get 1 game closer to St. Mary's. They will not tie them. They will not leapfrog them. It's just getting it a little bit closer before they see each other in Spokane in a couple weeks. And it's also another critical road game and quad 1 game it is for both teams, but it feels more critical for Gonzaga as their non-conference opponents have not held up their end of the bargain, and the resume is not holding up as well as maybe we thought it would early on, even in the non-conference, not as well as we thought it would hold up. So some big implications for both of these squads. And to kind of go over that, I'm going to bring in Andy Patton, an interview we did yesterday, so that we can go over what he sees in this matchup and what we can expect from this game. We couldn't go a Gonzaga St. Mary's week without talking with Andy Patton from the Locked On Zags podcast and Locked On College Basketball podcasts. We are here once again for the rivalry, the premier West Coast rivalry in college basketball, Gonzaga St. Mary's. Going into this one, obviously we know these two teams have had very different conference seasons to this point. Gonzaga's been a little bit up and down. They have the couple losses. St. Mary's has just been cruising to this point. Your initial thoughts as you think about like going into this one, just the excitement that there always is going into the week that when these two meet up.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it felt like a week where I was kind of expecting at least one of these two teams to not necessarily lose their midweek games, but to, like, you see teams often sort of look ahead. This matchup means so much to these programs, to these coaches, to these players, even players who are, fairly new to these teams. And I mean, St. Mary's got guys who've been there for 5 years. Gonzaga's got a lot of guys who've been there at least 2 to 3 years. And instead we see Gonzaga play one of their most complete games of the entire season against Oregon State, just blast that team. And I thought, okay, maybe we'll see if St. Mary's, they got a road game against a Santa Clara team that just, had a great game against Gonzaga. We'll see if St. Mary's maybe kind of has a bit of a lull. And they really didn't. It was only a 2-point game at halftime, but then they went on that insane, ridiculous jaw-dropping run to start the second half and kind of cruise to a victory from there. And these two teams are playing some sharp basketball right now. Obviously, St. Mary's stretch of good basketball has been longer than Gonzaga's. Gonzaga's only really been the last few weeks, but prior to that, Gonzaga had won 5 in a row. Granted, it was mostly bad teams in the WCC and Washington State, but still feels like both teams are at a good spot right now. But the big question is, St. Mary's has been there for a while. Can Gonzaga prove that this is, that 2 good games versus 2 bad games? This is kind of the tiebreaker. And it doesn't need to be a win for Gonzaga to feel like they're playing good basketball, but I'll tell you what, nobody's going to be happy if they go to Moraga and lose. So it's going to be a fun one, as it always is on Saturday.
Right. I mean, these two teams have split the last 8 matchups. They've won on each other's floor a year ago. These two teams are obviously so familiar with each other, and just obviously we know the styles are completely different. Gonzaga is fifth in Ken Palm in adjusted offense. St. Mary's is 25th in adjusted defense. It kind of took St. Mary's a while to get back to that defensive identity that we're so used to seeing them have. And in conference play, it's only one team has scored more than 60 on them to this point, which is just a wild number to think about. But with looking at Gonzaga, you talked about how well they've been playing the last week or so, the last couple of weeks. And really, it would look like it was the intensity returned against Portland, the intensity returned against Oregon State. Kind of talk to me about just like what you started to see in those two matchups that really looks like that they are starting to kind of maybe turn a bit of the corner, because obviously one of those changes was some of the lineups.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like there's a subset of every fan base that has kind of blames everything on the coaching staff, and we're not going to sit here and pretend that Mark Few is perfect. He's not, but I think there's this sentiment that Mark Few struggles to make adjustments, or is doesn't make enough adjustments, just kind of keeps rolling out the same thing. And I think that was an issue for a huge part of this season, and it was a huge factor in the game against Oregon State and the game against Santa Clara, where they were too predictable. You could tell what they were going to do on both ends of the floor. The defense, the defense that Mark Few's run has never really been very good, and he doesn't have the personnel to make it work with this system. And what we saw over that week off, and then of course the games against Portland and Oregon State, was a coach, a staff, and a team willing to make those adjustments, and they've paid off very handsomely. I think you got to take the Portland game with a little bit of a grain of salt, because that is a bad basketball team, and the idea that Gonzaga's defense was going to look good against Portland because they are not a good offensive team. But the Oregon State game, 12 days between games, and a game where Gonzaga's defense struggled for all 45 minutes of that game. They go out, they hold them to 60 points, they score 98. They just dominate from start to finish in that game. And the differences are pretty simple. The starting lineup change, bringing in Emmanuel Innocente. Gonzaga's running an 8-man rotation all year long. They switch to a 9-man rotation, bring Innocente not only into the rotation, but all the way into the starting lineup, while kicking Caleb Battle to the bench. And in the Portland game, Battle did not score. He only played 16 minutes. He didn't even take a shot attempt. And it was kind of like, he didn't look disengaged. He just didn't look he was kind of just not a factor in that game. He had a nice pass to Ben Gregg for an assist. He had an offensive rebound, but otherwise was kind of absent. But then he goes out and has this massive game against Oregon State. 23 points, 12 of them at the free throw line, had a 10-0 stretch where I think it was just him scoring late in the first half, just the kind of player that Gonzaga needed. And the reason this lineup change worked so effectively is that the starting lineup with Nembhard, Hickman, Battle, Ike, Gregg all together was too many ball-dominant players. Graham Ike thrives with the basketball in his hands. Ryan Nembhard, he's not a high-level scorer, but he's not effective unless he has the ball in his hands. Nolan Hickman, a little bit less so. He can be a catch-and-shoot guy, but he's also still a bit of a secondary creator. So you kind of had this offense where Battle, who's thrives, he needs the ball in his hands. He's not a catch-and-shoot guy. He's not that's what he is. He is a give me the ball, let me create, let me go to work. And he wasn't really able to do that in this starting lineup with players around him who kind of needed to fill that role. Innocente is not an offensive player at all. He's very similar to like a Mike Hart type in Gonzaga's past of he's a good defensive player. He's going to be right in your nose, right in your grill. But on offense, he'll get the ball moving. He'll keep them in that motion offense. He'll do some backdoor cuts. He'll crash for offensive rebounds, but he doesn't need the ball at all. So that opens up Nembhard and Ike and Hickman and Gregg to kind of play a little bit more freely, while it also allows Battle to come off the bench, play in a lineup with somebody like Dusty Stromer or Michael Ajayi, where they don't really need the ball as much in their hands, and Battle can just kind of command the second unit. He can take guys off the dribble. He can do what he's comfortable doing. It felt like an obvious move that it took Mark Few maybe a little longer than people would have wanted him to do. I think they would have hoped Dusty Stromer could have stepped into that starting role, but he just has not played well as of late, so he's kind of relegated to still being on the bench at this point. But it looked great against Oregon State. This is a bigger test, and we'll see if they stick with it, if Battle can do that against a team that doesn't seem to commit very many fouls, which is going to be challenging for Caleb. But I think this is a move that allows Battle to be better at what he does. We've seen Michael Ajayi look more comfortable in his role. I think that was just the coaching staff telling him, hey, just play ball, man. Like, just be more comfortable playing basketball, because he looked so tense and stressed. And just behind the curve early in the year, and now he's starting to kind of level out. Battle's more comfortable in his role. Innocente gives this team a really good on-ball defender to start games, which is a critical area that they've struggled this year. It's just a one simple move that has had a cascading effect of positivity for this team.
Yeah, and obviously the defense was something needed to change. They had given up 200 points in two games.
Mm-hmm.
They do play a lot better against Portland, against Oregon State. You mentioned the play of Caleb Battle and just how much more comfortable he looked in that role, at least in the two games we've seen it so far. But one of the guys, like, I keep thinking about, I keep looking at, and it's just, I think about just the growth of Ben Gregg and just almost how much more, how important he has been to this team this year. Because now it's like he's doing it on the offensive end on a consistent basis. And I think that's maybe like the biggest change that we've seen in his game, and just how much more reliant Mark Few and the coaching staff can be on him to give you points. Because I think even a year ago, like, he was just kind of like, again, you mentioned he doesn't need the ball, he doesn't need the basketball, still doesn't really. But this was someone who, like, when he entered the starting lineup a year ago, changed the entire outlook of this team. And we started to see a little bit of that about a month and a half ago now, when he re-entered the starting lineup for Ajayi as well. But, like, just to talk about, like, just the improvements we have seen from Ben Gregg, because this is a guy who just seems to just get better and better and better.
He's grown into his role and understands what is asked of him better than so many players, and it's kind of a hallmark of, for Gonzaga. They have a system that, it's pretty consistent. You know what they're kind of going to do year in and year out. There's some good and some bad with that, but they're able to develop players who, if they are willing to learn and they are willing to buy in, they can just be so crisp at knowing what is expected of them, knowing where to be, knowing what to look for. And I will mention Ajayi again as well. Of, like, at this point, Ben and Michael don't even look like they're playing the same position, because Ben has perfected what is asked of a 4 in Gonzaga's system. And it is a difficult position to learn, and it takes time. And when you look at Gonzaga's history, some of the most successful players in that role often were 3 or 4 year guys. Anton Watson, of course, being a very recent example, who really blossomed into an offensive player because he started to learn what was asked of him, what was needed. And Ben, in this role this year, he's, most points per game of his career. He's steadily improved 2.4 to 5.1 to 9 to 11 as a points per game. And this year he's playing a few less minutes per game than he did last year. He's still scoring more points. His 2-point field goal percentage, Zach, it's 72. Like, he is an insanely efficient scorer. The 3-point shot started off very rough this year. I think he missed his first 15 3-point attempts, but he was 4 of 4 against Portland in that game. He knocked down a 3 in the Santa Clara game, a clutch one, mind you. He has been a very, very productive player. He's a phenomenal offensive rebounder. That has been a huge aspect of his game this year. He's averaging just about 2.5 offensive rebounds per game. He's got the amount of, at least once per game, he gets an offensive rebound and gets a putback and a foul. And it is about the most deflating thing that can happen for the opposing team when you have a good defensive stop. You force a missed shot, and then they get the rebound and they get a bucket and a foul. It is, and it's the St. Mary is the second best offensive rebound team in the country. They do that a whole bunch to people, and it is really, really deflating. And Ben has been so good at finding those, exploiting those errors by defenders where they're not boxing out, getting those rebounds, playing tough, hard-nosed, physical basketball. Now with the 3-point shot coming around lately, he's a tremendous player, and he's kind of that glue guy. Some people don't like that term. I love that term because I think it's a term of endearment for somebody who can kind of impact the game on offense and defense. Gonzaga has a lot of players who are good at one and not the other, and Ben is kind of somebody who fits. He does both well. He can play inside, he can play outside, he can put the ball on the deck. He's a good passer. He's the only kind of big man they have who can make that entry pass to Graham. That high-low is such a staple for Gonzaga basketball, and they haven't been able to use it as much unless Ben's in the game. And it's just, he's just the kind of guy who, even in a game where it's like, oh, he had 6 points, 4 boards, and it didn't, the stats don't jump out at you. if you watch the games, you can just see how much of an impact he has, regardless of what the stat line ends up looking like.
Yeah, I think about late in that Santa Clara game when, I mean, the Zags got down 10, and then
Mhm.
it was almost like Ben Gregg on his own, just like willing them back into that game to make that one interesting at the very end. And obviously he had the 10 for 10 night against I think it was Portland last week. So we see the different flavors of Ben Gregg, but everything just helping this team get contributing to winning basketball and really doing it the way I know Mark Few wants it to be done.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at this game against St. Mary's, obviously, like, there's no secrets between these two. They know each other well. They know how to scout each other. This is always just almost for complete pride. So going into this one, looking at the matchups, like, for the Zags to go into Moraga, get this win, what are they going to have to do well, or what matchup are you watching for to see go the Zags' way for them to get a victory?
Yeah, there's a lot of things the Zags need to do well in this game. Yeah. This is a very solid St. Mary's team. They've been very, very good as of late. For Gonzaga, I think the main keys are defensive discipline. One of the things that we have seen teams do effectively against them this year is take their time offensively and kind of wait for cracks. St. Mary's has one of the longest average possession lengths in all of college basketball. They have done this for 20 years. So this is not unusual. This is not something that will surprise Gonzaga, but it is something where if you are patient offensively, the amount of times this year that Gonzaga has played good defense for 27 seconds, been late on a rotation and given up an open three it is infuriating for Gonzaga fans to watch that continue to happen. There is no team in the country that I would argue that is better at exploiting that than St. Mary's. UConn, very good at it. They did it a lot, and that caused Gonzaga a lot of problems. UCLA, good at it. They did it a lot, caused them problems. Oregon State, in that game in Corvallis, they did that a lot too. And for Gonzaga, being disciplined, communicating on defense, and then, of course, you have to keep Mitchell Saxon off the glass, especially the offensive glass. Like I said, the number 2 offensive rebounding team in the country. Saxon, I think, is like 3rd or 4th in the country in offensive rebounds. He is a monster down there. And certainly some of that is that there's not a ton of size in the WCC, but Saxon's bigger than Graham Ike. He's bigger than Braden Huff. Like, he is bigger. And Graham has played Saxon pretty well. He's one of the few bigs in the conference who has. And that's a huge matchup. It's a huge matchup between those two players. I think it's the most important matchup in this game. I think there's an argument for Ben Gregg and Paulus Morauskas, Ben Gregg / Michael Ajayi in that game. But I think that the bigs down low, if Graham's in foul trouble, that's a huge problem for Gonzaga. If Saxon's gobbling up offensive rebounds, but if Graham can score over him, if Graham can do the impossible and get Mitchell in foul trouble and get into the depth for St. Mary's, that's a big advantage for Gonzaga. So I think those are the biggest things. Obviously, tune out the noise. They haven't played great on the road this year. It's going to be a madhouse in Moraga like it always is. But I think those are kind of the most important things, is that defensive discipline, which has been good the last couple games, but was a huge problem the week prior to that. If it looks anything like that, this St. Mary's going to run away with this thing. So they have to be able to stay disciplined on that end of the floor.
I'd throw in maybe one more key, because I keep staring at Nolan Hickman, because almost way under the radar that he's shooting 47% from 3,
like 4th in the country or something,
which is a ridiculously high number. And obviously, like, there's always, like, he's one of the more maligned players, I feel like, in Zag history, just because of what expectations were and what some of, like, the quote shortcomings that many believe he's had. But he's one of the best 3-point shooters in the country. And I'm looking at, like, he and Jordan Ross are, like, on that 2 spot to kind of see how that matchup's going to go as well. You look at this. Go ahead.
No, I was agreeing with you. I think that's going to be a super interesting matchup, and hitting threes against St. Mary's is always a key to victory. And it's always a difficult thing to do, especially on the road. But if Hickman can knock him down, especially, that's going to be huge.
Now, looking at this rivalry, I mean, there have been so many times when this game is for first place, one way or the other, to tie it, to take it, to extend a lead, whatever else. But it's one of the first times where the Zags are looking up at St. Mary's this early in the season, and it's not an opportunity even to tie. It's just to get a little closer. Think about what's the importance of this game for the Zags, because thinking about how unfortunately a lot of their non-conference is unfortunately no longer helping them nearly as much as it once did.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to see a St. Mary's team who is right now up 2 games on the Zags. If St. Mary's gets the win on Saturday, it'll be a 3-game lead on Gonzaga it'll be 8 to go. What sort of pressure is there on Gonzaga to get this one? Because this really does put a loss here, puts St. Mary's in the driver's seat for obviously the league title, but also puts the Zags back in the grouping with USF, Oregon State, and Santa Clara, who have all just been beating up on each other all conference long.
Yeah, obviously Gonzaga wants to win the WCC. That is always their goal. It will always be their goal. But frankly, the most important thing for Gonzaga at this point is to be a top 2 seed in the WCC. You got to get that double bye. You got to get that double bye. Put yourself in a position where you're in that WCC championship game. I have seen a lot of content out there that throws Gonzaga's name out there as being on the bubble. I understand why. I think that they are in a much better position than the general. That I think a lot of that is you throw Gonzaga's name out there in the bubble, you're going to get clicks. Like I understand that the resume is not great right now, and I understand that the advanced data kind of does point to a team that they're not as comfortable as they typically are. For Gonzaga, you get a 2 seed or a 1 seed. You win, you get to the double bye in the WCC tournament. You're going to feel a lot more comfortable. But as you said, for this game in particular, losing this game means you are no longer fully in control of whether you can win the WCC. That is not a position Gonzaga wants to be in. With 8 games to go and you no longer have full autonomy over whether you win the conference, that is a very unfamiliar position for Gonzaga. So I think that is what makes this game crucial. Outside of that, they need a darn good win. Like they don't have, and it's not their fault that Baylor has not played nearly at the level people expected them to. Indiana has not played at the level people expected them to, although I don't know why they had such high expectations in the first place. San Diego State has struggled in the Mountain West. Like this team doesn't have the marquee wins that they needed to. Even some of the teams they've lost to have struggled more since then, which has been a challenge for Gonzaga in terms of making their resume look worse from wins and losses. So this team needs a win. They need a win badly. They need a no doubt, unquestionable quad 1 win. And they need to put themselves in a position where they are staying in the hunt for the WCC title. And a win here, maybe it doesn't necessarily mean they still win the WCC. St. Mary still is obviously going to have a ton of power. They're still going to be in the lead. They're still going to have another chance to get Gonzaga back. But if you win this game as Gonzaga, your odds of still being a top 2 team, still getting that double bye, go up a ton. Whereas if you lose this game, now Santa Clara is kind of in that mix again. Oregon State's in that mix. San Francisco may be in that mix, although Gonzaga still got 2 against them. That helps a little bit. But this is a game that if you win as Gonzaga, your comfort level in terms of getting an at-large bid go up a ton. Getting into the top 2 seed in the WCC tournament, they go up a ton. Like it is a huge, huge opportunity for Gonzaga to just make everything feel a lot safer in terms of that fear about missing the NCAA tournament. Again, it's not a be-all, and it's not a catastrophic loss if they don't get it, but it puts a lot more pressure on them to win that return game in Spokane in a couple of weeks. It puts a lot more pressure on them to not drop any more games. If you lose this game on Saturday, you got to sweep San Francisco. You got to win at Pullman. You've got to beat St. Mary's in Spokane. You pretty much don't have any room left. Like your wiggle room is right down to the bottom, because any other losses outside of this one put you in a position where you may be playing on like Friday or Thursday in the WCC tournament, and everybody's flights are going to be out of whack because nobody's even used to not going to the WCC tournament until that Monday because Gonzaga is always a top 2 seed.
Yeah, big implications for that game tonight. So thanks a lot, Andy, for hopping on. It's always great talking some WCC basketball, and especially this matchup, as this is always going to be a great one. And the walls will be sweating in Moraga as they always are. So thanks for hopping on, and we will definitely catch up before that rematch in a few weeks.
Thanks, Zach. Love it.
All right. Want to thank Andy again for hopping on. Obviously, we did the interview prior to the live this morning, but a couple of things as I was listening back through that, and one other kind of piece, one other I think item we're going to see Gonzaga implement that is always a problematic thing for St. Mary's, and this could be a huge factor, is I would expect to see defensively a press, a 3-quarter press, something to put pressure on the St. Mary's offense early on in this game, because that is something historically that has actually challenged the Gaels. It is something that Gonzaga has implemented over the years to try to disrupt that offense. Again, Andy mentioned the idea that of just the pace of play and just the way that they try to the amount of time St. Mary's takes in each of their offensive sets. If Gonzaga can disrupt that in any way, obviously the press is a great way to do that, but also something we saw early on in the non-conference that teams started to implement was also zone defenses. That this was also something that St. Mary's struggled a bit with, and you might see Gonzaga use that from time to time in this matchup. And I think that's going to be something else to watch for in this one. I think St. Mary's has seen zone defenses enough over the course of the last month or so that I think they're going to be at least a little bit more comfortable seeing that if it does happen to be run out there. And one more thing that as it popped back up in my head, thinking about the size of St. Mary's and what they bring, and mentioning that obviously like Graham EK is not as big as Mitchell Saxon, and something that we have seen St. Mary's implement a few times throughout the course of the season is using two bigs at once. We have seen it from time to time that St. Mary's will use both Mitchell Saxon and Harry Wessels or Andrew McKeever at the same time on the floor. And it feels like this is the sort of game where you might be able to implement that in a more significant way. That when we saw it at times throughout the course of the non-conference, that was just kind of like tease it here. But this is the opportunity to actually use it. And we've even seen Gonzaga do it a couple times as well. So there are a few more notes, few more nuggets that I think we might see in this matchup tonight. Once more on ESPN at 8:00 from McEwen Pavilion, not UCU, but that matchup tonight again. And I'm going to talk a little bit and transition over to two other matchups tonight that are critical for the WCC standings and just what we're going to see. Washington State and San Francisco play each other tonight at War Memorial Gym in the city, 7:00 on ESPN Plus. Washington State is coming off losing to Pacific again. This has happened twice now. Like they lost at home in that buzzer beater from Lamar Washington. They lost at Pacific on Thursday, 70-68. Pacific's only two WCC wins are Washington State. This was a game, though, that they did have Elias Ralph back for this one. 18 points, 8 rebounds for the senior. Lamar Washington had 13 points, 8 assists. He had a couple of late threes that were huge in this one. Dane Erickstrup for Washington State did have 17. But Washington State, minus 10 rebounding, minus 8 on points in the paint, 15 turnovers again. This is a team that has struggled with the turnover bug. This has been a problem all season long. They're one of the nation's worst in that category. This is a team that needs to figure out some momentum moving back the other direction. They've now lost 3 in a row, and USF has had 7 days to prep for this game. They have not played since last Saturday. And also the Dons are 13-0 at home. They're the only undefeated team left at home in the WCC. And I don't expect to see the same matchup that we saw the first time around. I mean, the first time around, this was a 91-82 game. 51 free throw attempts in that one. I would not expect to see 51 free throw attempts again. USF shot 41% in that one. Malik Thomas had 34 points, but he fouled out. Marcus Williams, he was 1 for 9 from the field. I wouldn't expect that to continue. Lawan Watts had a huge game in that one, 24 points, 12 rebounds. Ethan Price had 20. Isaiah Watts could be the difference in this one as he returns for this matchup. He did return against Pacific, but having his energy, having another three-point shooter, another offensive option for Washington State is a big one in this game. I think this really does come down to the turnovers, and just if Washington State can hold hold themselves in check on that front, I think that they could end up breaking their short losing streak here. But if that continues to be a problem and if they don't rebound a little bit better against USF, this is a game that the Dons they've defended the home court extremely well. And I would expect them to be able to pull off another win in that one. One more game to note is LMU San Diego. I mentioned earlier at the top that LMU, this is going for their 5th straight win. They've had fewer than 10 turnovers in 4 straight games. MJ Amy 3 straight games in double figures. Although San Diego has been playing a little bit better of late, freshman Tony Duckett is averaging 13 points in WCC play. Now, LMU, again, they won I had the number, 4 straight games going for number 5. They have climbed up to 6th in the WCC. They have leapfrogged Washington State, and they have the same number of losses as Oregon State, Santa Clara. And this is a squad that has a very favorable schedule down the stretch and could very well end up being 10-8, somewhere in that ballpark by the time we get to the WCC tournament. And if that's the case, like, this is a team that could actually, again, I think we had them at 6th at the beginning of the year, and that's exactly where they may end up at the end of the year. So we will see as LMU continues to play their more favorable schedule. They've gone through the toughest part of their calendar, and now they can kind of start to build that resume back up as we get closer and closer to March. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I want to thank Omar Samhan and Andy Patton for hopping on and joining. The Zags and the Gaels are tonight. This is going to be a fun one. This is going to be a good one. And normally I try to stay out the biases or whatever else, but not for this one. I am a Gael through and through, and it is Zag night. So it is beat the Zags and go Gaels.